Well, good morning. Hello, Michael.
Good morning. How are you?
All right, how are you doing?
Doing well. Looking forward to another incredible conversation on the show.
Yes. Yes. Well, and welcome to anyone who's joining us. My name is Shawn Nason, man on fire, podcaster, CEO, thought leader, speaker, with my amazing partner, Michael Harper, our chief of radical relations at or radical experiences at Mofi Relations too. He's radical at those too. So it's awesome to be part. We're really excited about today. But Michael, I want you to share a little bit about us at Mofi and who we are. And when we talk about experiences matter, what that really means. So Michael, take it away.
Absolutely. So, just a level set of what we're going to be talking about today, we have to look at everything we do as an experience ecosystem. And that's who we are at Mofi. That we are doubling down that organizations are not org charts, they're not P&L statements. Organizations are people, and people are the ones who drive the decisions, and even the processes in your experience ecosystem are driven by people. So instead of just looking at customer experience or employee experience or digital experience in a silo, what we choose to do is look at it as an ecosystem. And so this experience ecosystem is the web and the touch points of all those things that come together to make the employee experience, make the vendor experience, make the customer experience. And so today's topic, like everything else, is going to be based out of that model of looking at everything from a holistic ecosystem perspective.
I muted myself again. I'm going to get this mute thing done. Well, awesome, Michael. Thank you so much. And if you want to know more about the experience ecosystem and how we do it at Mofi, you can go to www.mofi.co to learn more about that as well. And if you're watching this show and you want to be a part of this show, please, we want you. You can send us an email at info at mofi.co, or now we have hello at mofi.co. You can send us there. We would love to have you part of the show. We are booking the show. But we really want to get into today and our amazing guest that we have with us today, Hannah Williams. I want to read a little bit about her, and then we'll bring her up. Hannah Williams' story began in a blue pickup truck when her father handed the 12-year-old Hannah the phone and asked her to close a deal on an investment property. After this unexpected introduction to the world of entrepreneurship, she found herself thrust into a climate of innovation, challenge, and opportunity, and she enrolled in college at age 14 and graduated with a degree in international business at age 18. Now, as a 23-year-old Gen Zer, she has consulted businesses from startups to Fortune 500 companies and is on a mission to help leaders leverage Gen Z talent as a competitive advantage and build radical empathy in the workplace. So we're really excited to have Hannah with us. Hey, Hannah.
Hey, good morning. I've already found myself jamming to that music. The intro music.
Well, we so appreciate you being here with us, and enrolled in college at 14, graduated at 18, only 23, but a wealth of knowledge. So we are so excited to have you here. And I wanna start with a little bit of a stoke, because there's this, I would say, Hannah, this perception in the world that millennials and Gen Zers are a lot alike, and that when we look at the workplace, that Gen Zers are wanting to have purpose and mission over salary and money in the workplace. What are your thoughts on that opinion that's happening in the world and in the ecosystem?
I'm so glad you asked that, Shawn, because much to many people who are listening, counterintuitive. What I'm about to say is going to sound extremely counterintuitive. And hi, Catherine. Good morning back to you as well. But what I'm about to say is going to sound so intuitive because what have all of us heard for so many years about purpose and work, right? Shawn and Michael, and I know, Michael, you've been training millennials for many years and helping companies adopt millennials. What do we hear? Purpose, 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 mission. Make sure your mission statement is attractive and that it's going to bring those millennials in the door, blah, 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 right?
I work to live.
Yeah.
I don't want to live to work, right?
Yeah.
My job is just something
Work-life
else that I do.
balance,
Right.
all those terms we hear.
Yep.
Gen Z, I'll put this in hopefully a simple way to understand. Gen Z does care about purpose, yes. However, mission statements aren't cutting it for us anymore. And the fact is, if you look at the data, and I know we'll get into my story a little bit as a Gen Zer, but when I come into the workplace and my fellow peers, and you look at the actual data and research around Gen Z, we actually care more about salary at this point in time than we do about work-life balance. That's a
huge.
Shocker to so many people who hear that, right?
Yeah.
And you'll probably be wondering, why is that the case? And it's really looking at how Gen Z has been raised. Shawn, you alluded in the intro, which I appreciate that, to my introduction into entrepreneurship and business when I was 12. I was raised by Gen X parents, and I know both of you are in that category too. So you may resonate with some of this, but as Gen X parents, my parents really instilled in me a sense of what the world was really like. Mm-hmm. That the world was a place that had opportunity, but that I was really going to have to work to get there. They instilled in me a pragmatic approach to life. And this is very different from the way millennials were raised by their boomer parents to really see the world through the eyes of a dream is a wish your heart makes, that something is blissful. And so I know we'll get into this, but the way that we have to lead Gen Z, the experiences we have to create in the workplace look very different from even the millennial generation.
Is it fair to say that there's, part of the millennial conversation was hard for so many because we didn't have the language for it. And so we're only able to understand what we've been through, right? And it was such a shock that we had to have some kind of, we're always looking for a metaphor, something that makes sense to us. And the millennials were such a shock. Is it true then that with the Gen Zers, we're still in that mode of trying to make sense of it based on something that we know, right?
Yes.
So for instance, when we say salary is important, my mind is going to go to, just like, salaries were really important to Gen X's, but that's not exactly true. There's nuances to it, right?
Yes. And let me back up, Michael, to answer your question or add additional thoughts. So I'm a Gen Zer. I'm 23, so I'm on the upper end of Gen Z. And Gen Zers right now, we're typically categorizing them as anyone born between 96 to 2012. So these are Gen Zers who don't really remember 9/11. So if you want to ask someone if they fit into that category of Gen Z or millennials, a good question to ask is, do you remember 9/11? First of all, do you remember where you were when it happened? Was it a big influence on your childhood? And if it wasn't, then the person you're speaking with is most likely a Gen Zer.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah. So what has influenced us more is a world where lots of change and turmoil has happened. So when I think about what influenced my early years, I can say confidently that school shootings influenced my fear in terms of just that. If you're just taking the 9/11 comparison, I'm much more inherently afraid of domestic terrorism than international terrorism. And that is something a lot of my fellow Gen Zers will resonate with. So if you look at the entire Gen Z population, what you're left with is based on how we were raised, by our Gen X parents, and based on the climate we grew up with, where maybe in middle school, we would glance furtively toward the door in the lunchroom, almost expecting that a gunman might
Wow.
walk in,
Right.
just because of the fact that the media
Right.
has told us that's super common. And we might have even known people in a school, a few counties over that went through that. So we grew up very, very fearful, which I hate to say, and we can get into some of the outcomes of that. But we grew up in a world that was fairly unstable. And if you can imagine, what if you were in high school or even college last year during COVID? We've basically grown up, you think about school shootings and then '08, and then you think about COVID, and just those three large defining factors have created a generation that is much more looking for stability in whatever they're doing, much more cautious. And to answer, your thought earlier, Michael, parallels a lot of things Gen X brought to the workplace. Even though, as much as we try to get away from our parents and try to say we're so different, we do mirror. We mirror a lot of Gen X.
Well, and that was, and you said it, and I'm glad you said it, because my thought process, as we've talked, Hannah, several times, is you guys are really looking for stability, which is something as Gen Xers, Michael was born in 72. I was in 73. We both have, and what's interesting in mine and Michael's situation is, he's got an older child that's a millennial, but then I have a 13-year-old and a 6-year-old that aren't even defined. My 13-year-old's in your category, right? And then the unknown is the 6-year-old, right? How their world is experiencing it. It's very interesting because I hadn't thought about it, but as I watch my 13-year-old, stability is really important to her.
Yes.
And so that's a great conversation. So can I ask you this? Because, and I know Michael's got more. I would really, what's one piece of advice or two, like really nuggets for leaders? I know you work with organizations, you work with Fortune 500 companies. I know people are going to be listening to this show. How do you hire? How do you talk about retain, retract, hire? Like, what is that? Because I think right now, Michael and I were just actually at a lunch this past Tuesday, where I think there's a perceived way that they think it should be done that we're hearing very different from you. And
I'm here, Shawn.
Yeah, right. That's why we're so glad. And Michael and I said we're going to have Hannah on probably several times because we're going to only scratch the surface in a 25-minute show. But just, even around attracting, let's just go to attracting.
Yes.
Gen Zers to your place. Let's not even go to the hiring and retaining. Attract. How do we attract Gen Zers into the workplace and into this ecosystem that we call the experience ecosystem? Because you are definitely a part of that.
Absolutely. So I'm going to answer this question in a second with one very practical tip that leaders can use to attract Gen Z. But I want to back up and give a little more context to why leaders need to be thinking about this absolutely now. This is something that I've been working on, Shawn, and I'm calling myself, and I'm trying to work on the branding. Hey, maybe you can help. But I'm seeing myself as a translator for analog natives, which would be your generation and the boomer generation, a translator for your generation to my generation. So if you think about this, let me paint a picture. If you grew up in Japan, you're a native of Japan, and you compare that with someone who grew up in America and then moved to Japan, maybe in their 20s or 30s, you're going to find that the native Japanese person is going to understand inherently their culture, their way of life, their values in a way that no one who moves from anywhere else to that country is going to get it. Right? I mean, you could say that of almost any country. It doesn't matter how much you love their culture or how much you try to adopt it. You are not going to be a native of that country unless you were born and raised there. And in the same way, Gen Z is the first generation that is digitally native. And so when we talk about attracting or recruiting, retaining, or engaging Generation Z, that conversation is going to look very different to an analog native listener who's trying to actually step themselves into the shoes of a native digital. The reason I bring this up, and my friend Christopher Lockhead pointed out to this to me, we were talking about this a couple of days ago, that Generation Z is not just a new, the newest generation on the horizon. We make fun of the new generation, we make fun of the old, okay, boomer, whatever. No, we are actually a new category of human being because of how digitization and technology has shaped us. We are actually a new category because no longer is the analog world our first experience. The digital world is our first experience, followed by the analog world and reality. And this could be a whole separate conversation. And I know I see your brains just turning and churning. Like, what does that even look like?
And I would have thought naively that a millennial was the first true digital.
And yes, I mean, you could certainly say that a millennial, because of social media being invented during their lifetime, they're the first ones to really stumble on it, right?
Right.
But
that's
Gen
different than
Z,
truly being a native.
Yes. Oh, Shawn, I think you're muted.
I try to not. You live in it. You weren't part of the creation of it. It was just there. So that's very interesting. That's a huge nugget.
You are literally, as a Gen Zer, you grow up with your first experience being digital. And here's an example. And I can say, as someone who's trying to be the bridge between the generations and help analog natives understand digital natives, I tend to have a lot of old-fashioned habits that I really try to rely on. Like, I try to watch old television and I try to listen to old music because I want to be able to relate with many generations. That's the role I serve. But when I look at my siblings, for example, I'm the oldest of 7, and my 6 younger siblings are very much Gen Zers, and they are constantly on technology. They may be on vacation, and their first experience of vacation is the pictures of the beach or the pictures of the mountains they're seeing or what their friends are doing. It may be an interruption to their vacation to go out and actually experience it. And this is something that, of course, any generation, I think, would say, let's help make sure that every human being is getting a full, well-rounded experience in life. And I'd be the first to say that. But we need to realize, or I would ask every Gen Xer and Boomer who is trying to understand Gen Z, you need to try to put yourselves in our shoes, because if you don't, you're going to be irrelevant in 10 to 15 years, because the world has changed to the point where this new category of human, of digital natives, is transforming the way consumer products are marketed and the way that the employee experience works. So this is a long roundabout way of answering your question, Michael, but I think it's important when we talk about attracting Gen Z, if I'm going to give a couple very practical tips, and you've got to understand that Gen Z approaches digital first to get this. So when most leaders hear that Gen Z is digitally native, the first thing that comes to mind as a recruiter or as an HR professional might be the tendency to say, well, if Gen Z's on Instagram all the time, then what should we be doing to attract them? We should be on Instagram with our ads, right? Like, we should be putting up ads, making sure we're seeing Gen Z where they are and meeting them where they're at. And I talk about this in my book, which is coming out on Tuesday. It's A Leader's Guide to Unlocking Gen Z. I talk about this because it's integral to how recruiters need to change the way they recruit. Gen Z is not looking on social media ads for our jobs. There was a study done by Yellow recently that basically just asked students, where do you go for your job search? Guess what % of them are going to social media?
I mean, you would assume, 75, 80% easily.
Yeah, 31%. Only 31% are looking at social media. And I can testify to this as a Gen Zer. I'm swiping straight through ads. Literally, they're so inauthentic. I could not care less what someone's putting out there. What I care about, and this is what may be shocking to some, 67% of Gen Z is going to friends and family for their jobs.
Wow.
They're asking their dad, hey, dad, do you know of any jobs? Hey, friend, Lauren, have you heard of any great places to work that pay well? And again, that's important. So if you're trying to attract Gen Z, one very practical tip I would give you, and I can tell you, not many companies are going to do this. And this is the reason it's so powerful. If you have a Gen Zer on your team, maybe they have 500 or 1,000 followers on Instagram. Maybe, they have a small following. Many Gen Zers have this. And they're working for your company. Say you're a healthcare firm. You have a nurse. She's, 21, 22 years old, and she's got an Instagram channel. You need to hire her as a career influencer. Mm-hmm. Now, what I mean by this is pay her in addition to her salary. Say she's making 40 grand a year. Pay her an extra $5,000 or $10,000 a year in exchange for her posting what it's like to have a day in the life as a nurse at your company. And I want to be cautious here in saying, most of the time when I say a day in the life, the image that comes to mind is of, the TikToker who's showing, a tour of the office and then there's no other content. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is someone who you pay to post consistently about not just the highlights, not just the day you got free food or whatever. I'm talking about someone who is authentically portraying the highs, the lows, the challenges, the BS days, the really great days in your company, and specific moments showcasing how working there is ultimately fulfilling to their individual purpose as a Gen Zer. Mm-hmm. If you can show authenticity, show this person is there for a bigger reason, that they're making good money, that they're making good connections, that they're receiving mentorship, you're going to connect with Gen Z with that $5,000 or $10,000 so much more powerfully than if you spent $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on social media ads.
With the keyword being authenticity,
yes.
Right? And whatever synonym comes with that, the living in reality, the focus on truth over the overwhelmingness of the information age, right? There's so much information. It's a matter of sifting through it now, and this generation is going to be able to help us do that.
Exactly. And that's why I brought up this concept of digital native and understanding where we're coming from, because we have grown up in a world of technology. We as Gen Zers are a little old-fashioned in that maybe we consume our entertainment and our lifestyle from technology, but when we're looking for career opportunities, we want a personalized, authentic company that we feel like our story, the story we are creating in our lives and the brand we have resonates with what that brand is accomplishing. And that's what we're looking for in an employer.
Hey, we could keep going, right? Like, I do want to be really really aware. We did have a question come through the chat, Hannah. So if we can get want to answer that in a short answer, and then we want one other question for you. So being a baby boomer, it's from Richard Miller. Being a baby boomer and a startup serial entrepreneur, tell me how to encourage Gen Z's co-founders.
So, okay, Richard, let me make sure I understand your question. Are you talking about finding co-founders, like actually finding Gen Zers who would be co-founders, or are you talking about encouraging or helping stimulate the activity that your existing Gen Z co-founders are helping you with a company?
Yeah, so we'll see if he responds to that.
I'll give you time to answer, but Richard, I will say just quickly with your question, there's another person here watching this live, Brendan Kumarasamy. He's a good friend of mine. Brendan is a Gen Zer. He's 21 years old. He owns a company right now. So if you want to talk to someone about what it's like being, a Gen Z entrepreneur, business owner, I would absolutely chat him because he's phenomenal. But Rich, okay, so you said yes. So both answers.
Yep.
So Richard, what I would say is the data is telling us 54% of Gen Z wants to be an entrepreneur at some point in their life. That's crazy, right?
Wow.
Over half of Gen Z wants to be an entrepreneur. So if you're trying to find co-founders, I would be spending a lot of time connecting with people personally, like Brendan, like me, other entrepreneurs on LinkedIn. If you just search within LinkedIn, just search Gen Z, you're going to see the thought leaders in Gen Z who will pop up, and I would be connecting with them. But here's a second tip. What I always encourage leaders to do, or business owners, co-founders, etc., if you're trying to find a Gen Zer who is entrepreneurially driven, who wants to start a business, who wants to embark on a project with you, then you're looking for Gen Zers with certain qualities, of course, but you need to approach them, number one, as a mentor, and number two, as someone who has something advantageous that they're not going to get from a bigger company. So what I mean by this, one of my friends, Blake Bozarth, he runs a podcasting business, and then it basically, his podcast feeds into doing mastermind groups with CEOs and their mid-level management. He hires Gen Zers with the intent of giving them this opportunity that's not just in sales, not just business development, but an opportunity to co-host his podcast and build their own brand. He says, here, Gen Zer, come co-host with me on my podcast. So you're building your own brand apart from my company and work with me in business development. If you can present that message to them, then you're going to find that Gen Zers who inherently have those characteristics you're looking for in a co-founder are going to flock to you because you're offering them a leg up they're not going to get if they try to do it by themselves.
That's a huge insight. That's a huge insight, just to pay attention to the need for Gen Zers to just intrinsically, inherently build their personal brand. That was not something on my radar in my entire career.
Yes, absolutely. And that's we'll talk about that next time we chat.
Yes.
Branding is a whole other thing.
Yes.
One last thing here real fast, Hannah. What trends about Gen Z do we need to be paying attention to for 2022 and beyond?
Great question. So if you're looking at 2022 specifically on the employer side, I would be watching Gen Z voices in the space. Let me give you some names. Oh, Richard, I'm glad that was helpful. Let me give you some names. So Brendan, like I mentioned, is here in the podcast or watching this live. I would also be following Jake Borzeth. If you look him up, it's BJORSETH. I'd be looking at some of these Gen Z founders who are on the consumer side of how Gen Z is shaping the consumer market, and see how you can get creative with applying some of the things happening in the consumer world, which tends to go faster and move faster than the employment side, and apply those to your business on the employee experience side. So I would be looking at trends like, of course, everyone's still talking about, do we work hybrid? Do we work virtually? Honestly, as a Gen Zer, when I come to those conversations, I'm just thinking, guys, isn't this obvious? Isn't this obvious? We should be hybrid. We need in-person connection. We need flexibility. Right. But I'd be looking for that trend of how can you be innovative? What are Gen Zers doing to be innovative in things like flexible office spaces, building efficiencies into a company, and then be on the lookout for that career influencer thing. I'm really trying to start this movement of companies who are saying, we're not going to settle for ads. We're going to be influencers. Those would certainly be trends I'm looking for.
I love it. Love it. Thank you. I want to make sure a couple things that we get in here. First off, A Leader's Guide to Unlocking Gen Z comes next Tuesday. Hannah's been working on this. I was actually part of a group that she used to pick her cover and everything. So you can also go, and if you want to go to this website, www.hannahgwilliams.com/Friday, you can pre-order there on Unlocking, our Leader's Guide to Unlocking Gen Z. Hannah, we want to thank you so much for being a part of this. And yeah, we're going to have you back in a couple months to talk another thing. Want to just thank you again. And if you'll hang on, we'll come back to you at the end. So Thanks. Just a couple things. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong one. Next week, Zach Posman, CEO of Helpfully, a research and design firm based out of Atlanta, will be sharing with us what they're doing in the space. Again, just a wicked cool guy and friend of ours. Next Friday, September 3rd at 11 a.m. Also, next week, if you have not read the book, The Experience Economy by Joe Pine, our podcast will drop, Engaging the Experience Economy with Joe. You definitely want to listen to that podcast and another great book out there. So, Michael, thank you. Hannah, thank you. And thank you for everybody that has been watching live and will be with us when you watch the show. Thanks.